Welcome to the Landscaping Podcast. My name is Joel Barnett and I am your host. And in today's episode, I'm talking with Luke Smith from Silverstone Gardening and the Australian Lawn and Garden podcast. Luke had an early start in the industry, getting his first paid gig mowing lawns when he was 15. And prior to that, he was mowing his own family's lawn, which is on a hectare, I think it was, on a big ride-on lawnmower. So he started in the industry early and he's still going today, and has gradually worked his way up into doing high quality garden and lawn care packages in WA. And earlier this year, he also started a podcast called the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. And I had to listen to a lot of the episodes because I was a guest on his podcast. So I wanted to know what it was about beforehand. And it's an awesome podcast to listen to. And it's not just about lawns and gardens. It's a lot about business as well. So Luke's got a good business mind. So it's really worth listening to that podcast as well. He's done maybe 30 episodes. And even there's just one with a fella who maintains Suncorp Stadium. But on the surface, I wouldn't have thought I'd be interested in that chat, but I found it fascinating. So worth giving that a listen to. And his second episode, I think it was, he talks about the best way to go about working out how much you need to charge. So I couldn't recommend that more highly. And we do talk about that in this episode. So good business mind to listen to is Luke. So hopefully you enjoy this chat with Luke Smith. Luke, thank you very much for joining us on the Landscaping Podcast. My first question for you is, how did you start in the industry?
I've been working in this since I was a kid. Like my parents had, my dad was an agricultural scientist, and he loved gardening and being out in nature. And my parents bought a large property, and so I used to mow lawn in exchange for having a mobile phone paid for, which, looking back at it, I thought it was a great deal, right? But it was like $20 a month, and I had to mow the lawn every week. And we had a hectare, so it was like, I don't know if it's a hectare of lawn, maybe half a hectare of lawn on a ride-on lawnmower. But I thought, how good is this? Probably when I was 14, and then I got my first paid gig. My next door neighbor was a very wealthy businessman, a lovely man. He's the sort of guy you want all businessmen to be like. And he bought all the neighboring properties and gave it to his children. And so there was this young fella who likes gardening. So he paid me $15 an hour when I was 15 years old. My friends were getting $9 something at Hungry Jack's. So again, I felt like I was balling, and I would just do odd jobs and their gardening. So I'd pull out their weeds and, mow a bit here and there and put some hay in the horse stables and whatever, like all that sort of stuff. And then I found I really liked it. And then when I was 18, I looked a little bit older. This is where I sort of got into more professional stuff. I looked a little bit older than what I was, and I got an opportunity at a school. And within 6 months of that, because of an injury, I was a head groundskeeper, and then it just went from there.
So were you working for yourself, or were you working for the school?
No, I was working for the school. So I got a very lucky break because I had that experience. And because my dad was a scientist in that field, I had quite a lot of knowledge for someone my age. A lot of time spent on a whippersnipper, a lot of time spent on a mower. So I had my friend's dad was working at this school, and he was 3 days a week at this school, 2 days a week at another. The other school offered him 5 days a week. And so he handed his notice and he said, I know a young fella who's pretty good. You should hire him. And so I went to what I thought was going to be an interview, and they said, here's a job, basically. And they never checked my age. And I'd only just turned 18. I'd only just left school. So they must have thought I was sort of 19, 20, something like that. And about 3 months later, they were like, oh, we never got your age. We need it to lodge your pass or something like that, or whatever it was. And I told them, and they're like, oh, we shouldn't have hired you. We've got students who are older than you, because it was a high school. And anyways, but it was an employment thing. And I loved that job. It was great. And then I started getting a little bit older and realized $22, $23 an hour, while it's great when you're 18 living at home, it's not going to, pay the bills for long. So that's when I started thinking about business.
And then, so how long were you there for?
I was at that specific school for a year. I did a charity thing. I mean, this is a lot of stories condensed into one, right? But my friends cycled around Australia for charity when I was 19, and I was a support driver. So I had to essentially quit the job because I hadn't been long enough there to have any sort of enough leave accrued, and they couldn't just wait for me for 4 months for how long it took. But they were like, "Hey, look, call us when you get back, and we'll see if there's any space for you." And while I was on that trip around Australia, I was thinking about my future, and I was like, "I need something that earns more than this." Came back from that trip to a whole bunch of job offers from other schools who had heard about me. It was like, here's this young guy who's willing to work, because most people who work at schools for $20-something an hour, there's a reason why they ended up at the school. Or they're semi-retired and, they might be great gardeners, but they're not very physical. So I had actually a lot of great opportunities, and I became the head groundskeepers at 2 different schools at the same time. But in the back of my head, I was like, no, I need to start my business, because I was on $23 an hour as a head groundskeeper, and there were 2 small schools, like probably, well, one of them is massive now, but the one had about 500 kids, and there was other people. So I was still more of a manager, and the second one had about 200 kids, whereas the one I'd started at had 900, probably now has 1,200 kids. And so that's where I started. But I technically started the business around then when I was 19, and I just started doing jobs at the end of the day, and then dropped my days over time, built the business up that way.
So have you done any qualifications, like studying horticulture or anything like that before then or since?
No, I've done very small little things. Like with the Department of Education, I had like weed control things, and different, identifying certain diseases that need to be treated. They had things like that. But I always had this passion. I learned a lot from my dad. Starting out, like, we had a bunch of fruit trees, and we had roses, and I grew up with a cylinder mower and a ride-on, and we installed the reticulation at this hectare property ourselves. And so I as far as an average 18-year-old, 19-year-old, I knew a hell of a lot, compared to the average Joe. My parents renovated houses, things like that. But I loved working outside, so I would just buy books. I'll go to the op shop, and back, in the day, most of the internet stuff that was available was European, North American, not very helpful for Australian climates. If you went to the op shop back in the day, there'd be these old gardening books from the 70s, 80s, 90s that were Australian, and you could get them for 50 cents. And I'd just buy these books and read them in my lunch break, or all sorts of stuff. So very self-taught, listen to a lot of podcasts. And that's one of the reasons why I started the podcast that I do, is because I got sick of having to wade through American information to make it suitable for the Australian climate. But no qualifications. I mean, I'm a licensed spray technician and those sorts of things that you have to be, but no Cert 3 or anything like that.
Yeah, it's another good example of, because I'm not big on the importance of qualifications. Like if my kids were going to go into the industry, make them get their qualifications, because it helps in some situations, but it's not the be all and end all. So have you had people who you've employed who weren't qualified and were still superstars?
I think the best superstars I've ever had working for me were qualified, but also the worst people who ever worked for me were qualified. So it's I think the reason why the best superstars, it wasn't actually the qualification that made them good. It was just that all of them were actually, one of them that I'm thinking of, he did most of the Cert 3 and then didn't quite finish it. But all of them, they went and did their qualification because they had a passion for the industry when they left school. And the biggest problem that I find in this industry is when hiring people, is finding people who love gardening and didn't just fall into it because they had no other options. And it is very difficult to balance, that on, or find that just through a resume, because you might find somebody who they were gardening since they were, or, we do maintenance stuff, so landscaping for you guys. They might have been a landscaping laborer when they were 18 and moved up the ranks, blah, blah, blah. but they never had any passion about it. They just fell into it because their mate had a landscaping business, and you hire them. Looks like they've got 15 years of experience. Maybe they did their Cert 3, well, blah, blah, blah. I just don't have the passion. They don't care. And it's the 1%ers that matter at the end of the day. And so, yeah, there's a value to it because you do learn stuff, but ultimately a lot of what we do is so unique in different ways across the country that to just limit to have a 6-month education or a 1-year-long education for whatever the certificates take is not, it's not going to cover everything anyway. So you end up doing a lot of learning on the job, no matter what.
Yep. Yeah, I'd say more than 90% of what you learn is on the job. So, that's.
Well, we had this lady work for us. She was fantastic. She had done really great stuff all throughout, qualified horticulturalist, but she'd never done lawn care stuff. And at the time when she came to work for us, our lead gardener was a qualified turf manager, former golf course superintendent, so a proper 4-year degree. And the amount that she learned in probably the first 3 or 4 weeks from being with people like myself and that turf manager who love turf and having those services as part of what we do and just getting out and doing those services, she probably learned more in the first month and a half, as she would have in a year in her previous jobs because of just the people you're with and what they know. And that's why I find most of the benefit is when you actually go out with someone who knows what they're doing. Like if I was to spend a day with you, I'm clueless in landscaping. I would learn more in a day with you than I would learn probably in a week in a course. Grown and capable than a 2-year course.
Yeah. Yeah, I find with education places, they have everything aimed towards the slowest people learning. Like everything is based on how the slowest person, which kind of makes sense because you can't go along too fast and then that person just struggles and doesn't know what they're doing. But that's just something I hate about education side of things. But it's also, it depends on who you're working for, whether you're going to get that right education on the job. Because there's landscapers and there's garden maintenance people who just do extremely basic stuff and they just do the one style. So you're not actually going to learn a lot working for those people. So there are times when the course is more, you'll learn more doing that than on the job. So yeah, it's not a black and white answer. It depends who you're working for. Yeah,
and that's the thing about we talked about this just off before we started recording, is we had this guy work for us and he was working for 10 years experience or something like that in the industry. And on paper, he looked fantastic. But the reality is the business he was working for did not care about quality of service as much as what we cared. And that was fine because the clients that they were working for didn't have as high a standard as the clients we were working for. And so even though we had 10 years experience, the reality was it was more like having 1 year experience 10 times over or 2 years experience 5 times over, because they weren't trying to solve fungal disease issues. They weren't trying to fix nutritional deficits. They weren't trying to, make the reticulation work so well that the water was even and, beautiful finishing. It was just, is it neat and tidy? Don't get complaints, and then we're happy, instead of striving for excellence. And, nice guy, as a person, nothing wrong with him, but a really bad fit for the business. And he wasn't qualified either. And so you wouldn't say, it's just that there's so much more that goes into it. And one part of it is knowledge, which is what you should get from a qualification. But if you don't have that care, that attention to detail, even the most experienced people, even the most qualified people may not fit,
Yep. So when Silverstone Gardening started, was that sort of those after hours projects while you were still working at the school?
Yeah, so I came back from that trip and about a month later I started the business. But I really didn't keep those jobs out or start doing that for probably a year. So I was, I really, maybe 6 months before, I think it was about 6 months before I dropped my days down. So I was doing, like I said, 5 days a week, full-time hours, but I started at 6, finished at 2:30, I believe, somewhere around there, 3 o'clock-ish. And so I could easily do work until 5 o'clock. or 5:30 or something like that. So yeah, that was it was a great way to start a business, because I was still living with my mum. I was 19 at the time. So no financial pressure for rent or for anything else like that. Just, you know, able to use every bit of income that I came in from the business, reinvested into equipment, reinvested into whatever, marketing, build a website, all that sort of stuff. And then, very much better way of transitioning than as if I was, 30, had, kids and all that sort of stuff.
Mm. And what sort of projects were you getting to start off with? Were they sort of ones that you look back on now? I think that was a horrendous job to work on.
Project is a very generous word. The very first job I ever did, I charged $35 an hour. It was for my great aunt, lovely lady, and she had a rental property that needed mulching. Second job I did was the same sort of thing. There was a rental, situation, and that just came through somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, and both of those jobs, $35 an hour. Not very proud of, what I did. I mean, the work was fine. People were happy, but it was, I mean, you have to start somewhere. I've worked out very quickly at $35 an hour is not actually $35 an hour when you. But I was, like I said, I was earning $23 an hour, and I was 19. And I thought $35 is gonna be so good, like think of all the extra money I'm making. And then I worked out, I was probably, once you pick up the mulch and all that sort of stuff. And I think I majorly underquoted that mulching job too. I thought I could get it done. I was probably a 5 cube or something like that, and I thought I could get it done in a couple of hours. And I was there all day, and all the problems that everybody else has ever had.
So how did you work towards the projects that you work on now? Like, what was when did you start trying to work on those projects?
Well, we're almost 10 years old. So it's like, this is a long process. And I guess it's the story of the whole business. But I was always a very motivated person. I always wanted to do really high quality work. And it was just one step at a time. At the time as well, whilst I had a lot of knowledge compared to other people my age, I really did not know the technical side like I do now. I even though I wanted to do the best quality work possible, I couldn't have done the best quality work absolutely possible because I just didn't have those skills. So it was honestly, it took about 7 years to get to a point where we had not just a good reputation for being reliable and helpful and nice, but a good reputation for actually doing really, really good work. And then now that's all we do now. But it was a small, even though that was the goal from the beginning, it was like small gradual changes, small gradual steps over time, trying to work that sort of stuff out.
And have you ever had any business coaching to get you to that point?
I have, probably for the last 4 years. Before that, I devoured audiobooks, and that was, for me, audiobooks and podcasts. There was about a 4-year period where I would listen to at least an audiobook a week. And the only fiction books I've ever listened to are the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it was all business stuff, or I'm weird like this. I love just really deep intellectual things. Probably get that from my dad. So I'd be listening to, psychology or philosophy or theology or debates on the existence of God or whatever, right? But a lot of it was business stuff. And I love that because, I mean, in the landscaping field, you guys do a lot of thinking whilst working. You got to measure this and then cut that, and your brain's quite active. When you're mowing, not really, like there's jobs that we do that are technical. Like if you're applying products or whatever, you really got to think about how you're measuring that out. But once you start applying, it's just up and down, back and forth, And so I had all that time, and there'd be times where I'd listen to a book, maybe an autobiography or something like that, and it'd be an 8-hour book on Audible, listen to it at 1.25 speed, and I would smash a whole day. I'd listen to one book an entire day, and so that was where I got a lot of that knowledge. And then I that was a really good start because I was so dumb like we all are when we start, that I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what questions to even ask. So if I went to a business coach, I don't think I would have gotten that much value because I was just so basic. And then after that, I realized, no, I need actually, books are good, but I need someone who can actually see what's going on as well. And I was finding that 90% of the book was not quite relevant anymore. I'd sort of crossed the foundational stuff, worked out the basics. And then after that, I needed more input. And I started working with a coach named Darren Gallagher, or Gallagher, I should say, actually, even though it's got a G in it, useless Irish spelling. Got these useless words. Nah, I'm terrible with English anyways. But I started working with Darren, and we had very similar business philosophies, very similar ways of looking at things. And so it wasn't this revolutionary, like all of a sudden everything changed. But business is an incredibly lonely place, and very rare for people who try to do great things in business to have other people who understand what they're doing, especially if all your friends are employees who have a paycheck week to week. It's like you need someone to talk to. I needed someone to talk to who understood, who had gone through those challenges, not in the landscaping or gardening industry, but in business. And I found that night and day difference between what I would have done. And I think I said in the podcast that you did with us that like a big part of it is because I'm so ambitious and I love, trying new things. A lot of it is just somebody to bounce ideas off to stop me from making dumb decisions. And just the value in that, like there's probably tens of thousands of dollars of bad decisions that I've avoided because of how excited I am about doing cool things. Things like that. That's been very helpful.
Yeah, I love what you said about the business coach wouldn't have helped early on, because I've always found that I think you need to have some sort of goal on what you're wanting to achieve before you get a business coach, because otherwise, like, what are you
100%
going to teach you to do?
Yeah, like it's like saying, okay, let's say the way I talk about it with the difference between business and say a career or university. If you start a business, you're like a pioneer, right? Who sets out their own path. Now you can follow somebody else's path, but they will have gotten to the destination before you. A pioneer back in the day were people who were looking for new land that they could claim as their own, and not just people who wanted to rock up into a town that was already settled. Whereas with a university, it'll help you, a university degree following career path. It'll take you to a city that's already fantastic. It's already set up, but you don't own the city. You're part of the city. When you're a pioneer, you set that new path yourself. And so a lot of time in business, you go, I want to get somewhere great. What does that even mean? Like what specifically do you actually want? Is it free time you want to spend with your family? Is it a certain level of income? Is it a certain reputation for having great quality work? Is it all that sort of stuff? And it takes time to actually work out what you want. When I started business, I thought I wanted a business that was going to be the biggest business in Australia. I wanted to have something that was going to rival gyms, but not be a franchise and this and that, whatever. And now I look at that and go, I know I don't want that. That was the immature, insecure ego of 20-something-year-old Luke, who wanted to maybe, prove something. What I want now is, something completely different. And so if I started off back then, wanting to be a pioneer and going, I want to get to this promised land, I don't even know what that promised land looks like. I'll just walk around in circles for years and years and years, trying to, starving, because, you get what I mean? You're going to get this guidance, and yeah, if you change your mind, you'll turn left, you go north, you go south, you go east. And it's only when you get mature enough to go, no, this is exactly where I want to go, then I can find the right person who helps me get exactly there, who has the same ideas as I do, who has the same way of thinking about business that I do. And then you can go get that. That was a rambling answer, was it? Did it make sense?
Yep, perfect sense. So how did you go about finding the right business coach?
It was actually something that fell into my lap. it was a conversation that I'd had with Darren just at a, this is a long convoluted story, but I had a conversation with him, and we both just understood business at the same time. And he at the time wasn't even a business coach. And we just started chatting more and more and more. And he was transitioning out of a career and was thinking about doing business coaching. And he had, whilst I say he wasn't a business coach, he wasn't officially, but he did have a lot of people because of his past experience that would do the same thing that I was. And people, you know what it's like when you meet someone in business who just thinks the same way as you, and they get it. But Darren had run an organization with, maybe 60, 70, 80 employees underneath him. It was in the non-for-profit sector, so very different to what we do, but had also run teams in profit sector and things like that, specifically with software and all that jazz. And so I was just going, well, here's a guy who knows more than me about all sorts of stuff, running teams, hiring people, marketing. That's what his degree is in. And so we just started chatting over time and then made it more official as time went on. And now that's what he does. He's transitioned out of the previous career that he had. And he's a business coach,
And talking about some of the podcasts, like you like listening to podcasts and audio books. So what are some of the ones that you started on early days about the industry more so than the other ones?
The industry specifically, or do you mean like business?
No, industry specific.
So that was my problem. I couldn't find anything that industry specific, because remember, this is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I bought these books. I couldn't recommend them, that were American books based on how to run a successful lawn mowing business. But the climate is so different, and it actually makes business so different. Like most of America, weekly mowing is normal, and fortnightly mowing is sort of like, you're a bit cheap sort of thing. You're trying to save money. Whereas here in Australia, fortnightly is going to cover most people, and weekly is like super high end. And the reality is that makes it so much easier, because you get twice the money for half the administrative problems, half the clients. And you're there every week. Scheduling is so much easier, all that sort of stuff. So it's much easier to build businesses. If you look in Australia, there is no business that is a true. No, I'm not talking about franchises here. A true residentially focused business that just does small jobs. There's very few that break 10 employees. We had a point where we were 13 or so employees, but probably 6 or 7 full-time equivalent hours, because we had a lot of casuals and part-time. And we were one of the biggest. We would have been in the top 10, purely focused on residential work. You go to America, there's heaps of businesses with 100, 200 employees. And the way that they go about things is it just makes so much more sense. It's so much more efficient. So a lot of those books, I listened to them and didn't find much applicable,
So why does it make more sense the way they do things? Is it because they can do things more frequently, like more weekly mows compared to fortnightly?
So the biggest killer of the residential lawn maintenance or garden maintenance is what you would call non-billable hours, right? And it's huge. It's insane how much these things cost you. So like if you think about a lawn mowing round, let's say you're doing 30-minute jobs, right? If you drive 5 minutes between those 30 minutes jobs, right? That's like 20-something% of your day, or a little bit less, so 18% of your day is just spent driving. If you was like 30-minute job, 5-minute travel time, 30-minute job, 5-minute travel time. A lot of guys, they're driving 20 minutes between this job, 2 minutes to the next one, 3 minutes to the next one, 14 minutes to the next one after that. So that's a killer. And then when you consider the huge administrative burden, it's not necessarily technical stuff. Like we've talked about this before, where what you guys do in the landscaping construction industry is very technical, but administratively. But what we do is just labor intensive, because like last calendar year, we did 5,000 different services. And so that's 5,000 reminders that we're coming, 5,000 services to be scheduled, so many reschedules because of weather, different people to deal with. We've serviced over the 10 years more than 4,000 different clients and properties for probably the same turnover that a professional business like yourself could do with 100 clients, over that period of time. So there's just so many phone calls to answer. It's not uncommon for us to have 20 phone calls in a day from different people in busy period, because people are rescheduling or they want new work, they want to add something to the next service, and emails, all sorts of stuff. So that's all non-billable. You don't charge for your travel time, you don't charge for your equipment maintenance, you don't charge for administration. And so if you can simplify that down, it makes a huge difference. So the less services you do, right? Also, the less clients, you service. If you can get $1,000 per client, great. But if you can get $2,000 per client, you can serve half as many clients, which means, you can really hone in your schedule. You get your travel time down to 2 minutes between each job, way less phone calls to answer, all that sort of stuff. And so it's just so difficult to build a business. And it's not that, we have business idiots here in Australia. It's just that the model is just so unsustainable, because there'll be guys out there who will do it all themselves, who are happy to do an hour of admin every single night. They do a pretty average job of the admin, but it's good enough. And so they don't charge for that. They don't realize they're not making much money. And 2-3 years in, they leave the industry. That's sort of standard. Then you have a professional business who's really doing it really well. And just the cost of paying for admin staff and all the systems involved with that means that you're 20-30% more expensive. So it makes you it's a challenge to win some jobs certain times. And that paints this whole picture. Whereas in the US, when you have that more regular stuff, a professional business might only be 10% more expensive than a cowboy. And so it's just a no-brainer to go to a professional business instead of 30% more expensive than the cowboy. So,
yeah.
I mean, there's probably 45 other issues as well, which make it difficult. Like, America has massive populations, and so insane route density. If you have a city like Dallas, 5-10, million people, that's not even their biggest one. So in a place like Perth, close to 2 million, that's like a small town. In some of those places over there. So there's just a lot of challenges. I guess there's probably a lot of new stuff for landscaping people, because they wouldn't think about this typically, because you would have one job that takes you a week or a month or something like that, right?
Yep. Have you got any apps that help with that administration side of things?
Yeah, we use a CRM. Do you use a CRM?
No, unless that's what you call a diary with a pen. That's what.
Oh, mate. I told anybody in the residential market like we are, who's not using software like that, it's, I don't know how these people do it, because I know that they think it's easy, and there's some people who, laptop stuff seems, like a big jump, especially if you're an older generation. I totally respect that. Once you get it worked out, it saves you hours a week, and saves you a lot of forgetfulness mistakes. So yeah, we use a software system called Service Autopilot, which is quite a rare system over here in Australia, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It only suits a certain niche of people, which is people who do what we do, which is, larger businesses managing multiple employees, that sort of thing. But any software system, ServiceMate, Jobber, there's a bunch of them that they can help you. So, like, for example, one thing Service Autopilot does, one thing about a bunch of them do, is you have all your jobs on a map. It's common for us to do 15, 20 jobs per crew in a day. It will automatically schedule them in the most efficient driving route possible, and it will do it in about 2 minutes. And you might want to check over it to make sure there's no errors. Usually 99% of the time it's fine. That could easily save you an hour a day, in terms of just bad driving time. Just being able to categorize people. Every single job we do has an after photo. It's all saved on there. So if I rock up to a client's lawn, they've got a fungal issue, I can look back. Did they have this issue last year when we were serving them? Is this something that we need to change on their package to make it, like all that sort of stuff? It takes a lot of things out of your head and puts it onto a system. All that jazz. We have people from 2014 who are on there. I can still look back at all their job histories, even though they haven't been with us for years and years and years, and all that sort of stuff. So, for a business very admin heavy, it's huge.
And does that help with sending out invoices?
Oh yeah, all that sort of stuff. We can send 50 invoices in 3 clicks, because the way that we do it, you have a recurring service where, say Margaret's on $50 a cut or whatever it is, and you've got your 50 services for the day that we've done with multiple crews, and you just go through, have a look at everything, and there'll be notes under every single job from the gardener if anything's been skipped or changed or whatever. Get rid of the ones that weren't done, click select all, and then click send invoice. Done. And so you can imagine what it'd be like in Service Autopilot does that way. Automatic follow-ups to those invoices. The same with scheduling. So you might have your 50 services that you're going to schedule. You'll go, okay, well, I'm going to click on those jobs, make sure they're efficient, schedule them into 3 different, groups for the employees to do. And then, bam, like I said, automatically as efficient as possible. Then you just click them all, select all, and then send, reminder, and they all get an email, which is characterized to them. We typed it out, and saved it as a default in this database, but it'll select the client's name and all that sort of stuff. It's just, you can imagine the amount of work it would be to individually email each single person and individually send each single invoice. But even then, it's still, still huge numbers of phone calls, still huge numbers of requests, and that's I got an email this morning saying that we've had 7,000 people on our website in the last month, and a lot of that is for our advice stuff. But I would say probably, I'd estimate, having not looked at it, but knowing what the data is previously, probably 800 to 1,000 of that is people looking for services. It's, it's insane. It's insane amount and we try and filter them. We won't get that many calls because we basically, all over our website, we go, we're expensive. We're basically saying, don't call us unless you've got some good money and a budget and you actually want, so, but there's just huge demand for those sorts of work. I think Jim's Mowing have hundreds of thousands. I interviewed Jim Penman from Jim's Mowing. They have hundreds of thousands of leads that don't go serviced every year. Like hundreds of thousands of people who contact them who they just can't help. It's, that's the industry. It's just so much admin.
And speaking of your podcast and having Jim on there, that was your episode with him was where I discovered that his name is David, which I reckon no one else would know that.
I didn't even know that. I was doing some research, so I'd asked him to come on, and he said yes, and fantastic. So I try and do, I don't over research because I want to find out a bunch of stuff, but I'll try and just get some basics down, maybe learn some things. And I Googled Jim Penman, and the first thing that comes up on Wikipedia is David Penman, known as Jim, is what? No way. And the story is that basically he told me this on the podcast that when he was a teenager, late teens, he worked on, I think it was a farm. And there was another guy there named David who had been there for a long time. And so they were like, oh, we got to give him a nickname. And I think James was his middle name. So they just started calling him Jim, and then it stuck. And so, it's the biggest franchise in the Southern Hemisphere. His name is on everything. It's all a lie.
Yeah. It's funny. Like when I started working, like a lot of people call me Barney, and there's people who don't know that's not my first name, but not so much anymore. But because when I started with InStyle, there was another Joel already there, so same deal. Can't have 2 Joels, so it's confusing. So I went with Barney. And then when I started the business, when I took over it, I'd ring up to order something, and then I started saying it's Joel from InStyle, and they say who. But no, don't know.
Yeah, it's Barney.
So he would have that same thing if he said it's David from Jim's Mowing.
Can you imagine? And he could do that, and then everyone. Because one of the things I like doing, I had some health complications, and I wasn't out in the field for many years, and but I'm back out doing jobs now, and I had this yesterday. Is it yesterday, day before? where we've made some changes, and the client was like, I got an email from your boss, emails from me, but I'm not going to correct them because I love people are just so honest with you when they don't know that you're the boss. They'll tell you about how things are. And I just love that in our line of work. You probably couldn't get away with it in your line of work, but yeah, people will call, someone will pick up and be one of our admin or whatever, and they just think there's a gardener being sent out, and even if it's the boss, but he could do some pretty good customer care calls, just saying, "Oh, it's David from Jim's Mowing. How was this person? How did you find the experience?"
Yeah,
I would definitely do that.
And with the podcast, what was the catalyst behind starting that? Because I was a guest on your podcast. So before I'd come on, I wanted to listen to a few episodes just so I knew what it was about. And it's now one of my favorite ones to listen to because there's just an insane amount of value that you put in there. But what was the idea behind starting it?
Well, there's a few. Thanks for the commendation as well. Like, I've been very blessed that we've had some amazing guests come on as well, and that makes up the majority of what makes the podcast good, in my opinion. But like I said before, the first thing was that there wasn't a podcast like what I was doing or what I wanted to hear. There's good podcasts out there like yourself, Gary from Aussie Lawn Stars. There's Ben and BJ from Lawn Care Skull Sessions. That's a really rowdy podcast. They talk about that's just two mates waffling on about life, but both of them are involved in the industry, and there's a few others as well but none of them were quite what I wanted. And I loved podcasts. I do love podcasts. I was listening to one before we came on. And again, a debate on the existence of God, believe it or not. No, I think that. But the podcast was the first thing was I have made every mistake under the sun as a business in Australia, and I have a passion of helping people out in business. And there's some Facebook groups that I've been a part of, and I made a bunch of videos explaining business concepts, and people really liked it. And I had somewhat of, I wouldn't call it a following, but I would have people messaging me or, asking for advice. And, on Facebook, people expect a 3 to 5 minute video. It's not a long form place, and you can't discuss these things properly without long form conversation. I went on Gary Ashton's Aussie Lawn Stars podcast twice and got really good feedback from that, and people wanted more. So there's that part of it, and then just the technical side as well, like technical side of lawn maintenance, garden maintenance, that sort of stuff. We've just done a podcast we released this morning called "How to Make Professional Lawn Care Packages." The guy we're interviewing is got a master's in turf management. In Australia, right? Like there just isn't that. There's no other podcast that has that, directed at small businesses doing that, and I had to find that the hard way through just a lot of study and, just a lot of reading articles and things like that, talking to people around my area. The packages that we use now took 2 years to design. And so it just was a hole in the market, and I wanted to help people out. And so I started it, and it's gone insane. Like just the response from it's been awesome. So yeah.
And you love doing it?
I do. It's like, how some things, you do some things that are work and you get exhausted after an hour of doing it. Admin's like that for me. Man, I think when you came on, I'd just done back-to-back podcasts. I'm going to do a podcast this afternoon with somebody from my podcast. It's like, I could do them all day.
Yeah. It's
just, you're talking about business, talking about the industry, talking about, cutting lawns. I don't know, that's in my blood, and it's fun. Editing it's a bit more work, but
you use AI for that though, don't you?
I do a little bit, but you still got to cut out the mistakes, like all that racist stuff you were saying before that you've just got about to cut out. That's a joke, people. There's nothing racist.
Yeah, you said I love Nazis on your episode as well.
Yeah, all that stuff. Oh yeah, we probably shouldn't take this too far now. People will start thinking we're serious. No, there was no Nazi talk, no racist talk. I was just trying to have a joke at Joel. But no, I use a little bit of AI. There's some crazy stuff coming out. We use AI in our business now as well to answer some admin. We're testing it. It's I wouldn't recommend it just yet, but I reckon in a year,
Yeah.
like if you guys ever play with ChatGPT, it's pretty good. And these AI models that they're doing, you can train them basically on how your business does things. It's pretty interesting. If people want to find more about that, we did a podcast on that with Darren about a month ago, my business coach, and talk to him because it's way out of my league, all this sort of stuff. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, when I did my first 5 episodes of the podcast, like I recorded them all at once, and I went down to Wollongong to record them, so I was staying in a hotel. But I remember getting back to the hotel thinking, if I could get paid for this, I would do it full time because I just love doing it that much.
It's tough to get paid though, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you've got a sponsor, so you're doing better than me.
Well, I do, and I'm very, very blessed to have that sponsor. It's called the Lawn Shed for those who are interested, but probably not targeted to your market at all, actually. But
there's plenty of maintenance people who listen.
Well, the maintenance people, then it's a company that sells basically fertilizers and things like that, supported by Living Turf or assisted business to Living Turf, which most people would have heard of. But also Patreon. I reckon you should start a Patreon because, I mean, we haven't talked about this before. I'm just going to publicly, give you advice on the podcast. It's probably not, you can cut this out if you want, but the Patreon, it's awesome because the way I do it is it's a light-hearted joke, but you can either give me a Pepsi Max a month, which is $5, or you can buy me a Zinger box a month, which is $15 or so a month. And it's not a lot of money. And if people really love you, it's, they will do it. And I don't have crazy amounts. We've only been going for 5 months, right? But it does build. And every month a new person signs up. And, if you have 100 people giving $5 or $15 a month, you might get $500 to $1,000 a month. And what people don't realize as well is, I mean, I don't know how long it takes you. It takes a hell of a lot of time to do a podcast. You record, organize it, do a bit of study, then the editing, releasing it, all that sort of stuff. And I've heard you talk about before how you don't want to put on ads because it sort of devalues, or maybe not devalues, but it makes it a bit.
I just don't like listening to ads. Like you talk about it when you do one of your ads that people don't like listening to it, and I'm just one of them. I just don't like listening to it, so I don't want people to.
Well, you can skip, and I don't mind if people skip. Just fast forward. That's I'm not going to force them to listen to an ad. But the reality is, how much better would your podcast be if you got $1,000 per podcast? Do you know what I mean? Like,
it wouldn't be any different.
It wouldn't be, wouldn't it?
No.
Oh, for me, I would make it like I have a pretty good studio, but I would be just trying to edit it out, trying to send out more content, like cutting. Like one of the things that I would love to do, which I can't do, is for time at the moment, is have 10-minute segments and put them up on YouTube because people love listening to that sort of stuff. It's just a lot of time and having a nicer camera set up and putting in the software to make people sound better and just trying to make things, I don't know, and the time as well. The reason I'm in my warehouse right now and not in the studio is because I've got things to do and I've moved house and I would like to have been in the studio. It just wasn't possible, but it just takes time and takes time away from the things that actually make you money. And so having a podcast where you could make money from it, stops you burnout, stops you from taking on too much stuff. But you've been gone for a long time now, hey?
It's been over 2 years. But I would feel too much pressure to provide more value. Whereas something you said something which I found very wise. Whereas you get what you pay for, and people aren't paying for anything, so they can't expect anything.
Exactly. Yeah, lower your expectations. It's free.
Low expectations.
Well, if you think about it, if someone joins to my Patreon, it's $5 a month, right? And we're releasing about 6 episodes roughly a month, maybe 8 on a good one. So it's $1 an episode,
Yeah.
And some of the business stuff, like I had a guy message me. And you said this when you came on, that there's a podcast I did called "How to Get Your Pricing Right," or how to work out what to charge, right? And that's been quite popular, for a podcast in this niche. A guy messaged me saying he listened to the podcast, realized he was undercharging, raised all of his prices by 25% and didn't lose a client. So, he is a Patreon now. I don't know. I can't remember how much, but if he's, I couldn't care less. Well, but I couldn't care less because I'm not trying to I'm not trying to force people to give money, but the idea is that he's got great value. And look, I would do it for free as well. It's just practically speaking, you could, the way it works for both of us right now, because I'm not making bank of this, is you fit it in around the things that actually pay your bills. And if push came to shove and the decision was pay my bills through working or make a podcast, there's just no choice. You have to, pay your bills. So that's why it'd be great to one day make it sustainable, which is really, that's the word I'm looking for. Sustainable, profitable. I don't know. I think that's the thing. You feel like it becomes this capitalist, and I'm a capitalist and nothing wrong with that, but it's just this cold hearted, I'm going to make money off listeners. It's not that. It's like, more about preventing burnout and having some sort of support. So at the end of this podcast, when Joel puts up his Patreon, people, go support him,
And
especially if people listen to 50 of your episodes, man, you deserve something from that. Obviously you're doing something well, and if 100 people have listened to 50 of your episodes, and I'm sure there is, and they all give you $5 a month, they won't even notice that money's gone. And to you, probably allow you to buy that second Lamborghini you've been looking for.
I'll get the red one to go with the yellow one.
Yeah. And the white leather trim on the inside.
Yeah, but that episode you touched on briefly there, teaching people how much they should charge, is one of the best episodes I've listened to. I think it's your second episode. Does that sound right?
It's one of the early ones. Yeah. But that's the thing. I was doing videos on how to work out in charge in 5 minutes on Facebook, and they were getting a lot of interaction. And you just can't explain anything in 5 minutes this technical. And I think it's 50 something minutes long. It's about an hour. And there's a spreadsheet that you can download from our website for free that people can grab. And it's not the most accurate way to do it, but it's very, very accurate. The most accurate way to do it is to really work with an accountant over a long period of time, but it's accurate within dollars, like within $5 of really what you should be charging to hit your profit, margins, lots of stuff. Yeah, like that's been, I had a guy who runs a landscaping business messaging me and saying, we've done pretty complicated calculations and your spreadsheet's like $2 an hour off what we worked out with, that. So yeah, and that gets a lot of good feedback, that podcast.
So where will people download the spreadsheet from? Because I listen to it as a podcast, but I reckon it'd be better watching the YouTube video that you did of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do, because it's got about 2.5 times as many views on YouTube as it does on Spotify or Apple or whatever. And I think a lot of people they'll listen to it whilst they're working, and then they'll go home and watch it again. Because if you've never heard about these concepts, I've tried and dumb it down, and I do say in a podcast that you're not a dumb person just because you're a gardener. And anyone who's in business for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you're actually very, and I'd say this, I totally mean this, you're actually very smart and you're very successful, because that's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve. Most people don't make it that far. You also probably have a bunch of issues, like we all did. So don't look at your issues and shoot yourself down and think you're an idiot and you can't work out these concepts. You can, it just takes some time. Might be not the most natural thing to you. So go on the YouTube and you can see me working the spreadsheet, and you could download the spreadsheet at the same time, pause the YouTube video, maybe watch YouTube on your phone, be on your laptop, work out your numbers through that. And hopefully it provides at least a zinger box worth of value.
Yeah, and like it's the same with like your podcast being more. It's called the Australian Lawn Garden Podcast, and I'm more a landscaping podcast. But so that's why I wouldn't have listened to it initially. But there's so much in there, and the same with when you're working out the hourly rate, that's relevant to both businesses. Like it's just relevant to business in the green industry overall. So I can't recommend it
Yeah.
highly enough for people to listen to it and not just be thrown off by the name. Like there is plenty of talk about lawnmowers, but generally there's heaps of value in it.
It's definitely targeted because we spent a lot of time talking about those non-billable hours in that, which is probably not as relevant. It would be simpler to work out
Still
for you
it's
guys.
underrated. There's still a hell of a lot. Like even just getting the set up in the morning and at the end of the day and changing a wheelbarrow tire and there's heaps of stuff.
I guess, yeah, and that's the other thing as well, because and I said this on the pod, I truly don't know much about what you guys do, which is just, it's funny because this has been my whole life, since 15. It's been working in some form, but I just have done such little. I mean, I've done maybe 2 paving jobs in my whole life. Neither of them were paid. Like I can, I just, there's family or whatever. But like you get the, so yes, I don't understand exactly what you guys do every day, but you it's relevant for most businesses in the service sector, to be honest. Like my sister-in-law does a cleaning business and she was wondering what to charge. I was just like, listen to my podcast and just replace lawn mowing with vacuuming or I don't know. I don't see it. I'm going to make myself look like more of an idiot here, but like whatever you do cleaning wise. And that's incredibly similar because they're the same in that I might not do 20 jobs in a day, but they might do 3 or 4. And they probably do a lot of driving. Non-billables are a killer, all that sort of stuff. And the other thing that happens, which is just so dumb, is people go online and they look up the numbers. And I mean, the podcast says it all. We did a study. Studies loosely. We asked a bunch of people on a Facebook group, and we had about 600 responses. What do you charge for 1 hour worth of work? And so we got a really good aggregate of what people actually charge in the industry. The problem with that, if you just copy everybody, this, Joel, most people fall out of business in such a short period of time, 6 months, a year, 2 years. If you copy what everyone else is doing, odds are you're going to follow what most people are also doing, which is falling out of business, hating the business, realizing they're not making any profit. So you need something that's more concrete. And that's what I did when I first started, just copied other people. And it took me about 3 years to work out what could be learned, maybe even 4 years properly to work out what could be learned in an hour in that podcast. So yeah.
I have people ask me certain things like how much do you charge for this type of paving or that. And I say, well, it doesn't matter what I charge. I mean, to work out how much.
100%. I got a guy message me the other week, and they say there's no such thing as a dumb question. I disagree. There are some dumb questions, like that one that you just said. It's not a dumb person who's asking it, but maybe they haven't really thought it through. But I had a guy ask me the other day, and I very respectfully answered him. I don't want to say that he is dumb, probably inexperienced, but he had somebody ask him to quote for a tender, and it was a facility with about 40 or 50 properties, units, I should say. And he sent me an email or a copy and paste of an email of what was required. No square meters, no photos, nothing like that. And he asked me, what would you charge for this? And I totally understand where he's coming from, because if you've never had any experience, how do you know? But also, how do I know? How can I possibly know? And I said this, like, there's so many variables. It could be $10,000 or $90,000. What's their frequency they want? How long is, a piece of string essentially is what you're asking. So, you do have to work the stuff out for yourself. And the cold, hard truth is if you don't want to do that, you probably shouldn't be in business, because you're probably going to fail at some point.
Yeah. Like there's things like even just like you look like you're sitting in quite a fancy shed there. So like
It's all right.
I've got a shed and I paid 25 grand at least a year. So there's $500 a week. I'm paying more than what someone who just works out of their own house is paying.
Yep.
So
that's roughly what we pay here. Yeah.
Yeah. So like just something as simple as that is a perfect example of what one person charges and someone else might not.
Yeah. And then again, if you're talking about admin staff versus, just doing it yourself, or if you're talking about like, we got a lawnmower that when brand new is $54,000, so what you can't charge the same amount of hourly rate for that as you would for somebody else, but your efficiency is through the roof. So per square meter, we're actually very competitive with that machine. finish is amazing, stripes up the ovals and things like that. But yeah, like if you just asked hourly rate. And the other thing as well that I will say is hourly, we don't even charge an hourly rate. And I don't know how do you do this? We didn't talk about this when you came on. We charge a fixed price, and whatever the time the job takes is what it takes. So incentivize you to be a bit more efficient, to invest in machinery. An hourly rate puts a cap on what you can earn essentially, and there's a cap on your profit margin, and it actually incentivizes people to be slower, and it punishes people who have invested in great machinery and have a lot of experience, and so they solve problems quickly. And so we don't charge that way, but you do have to think about these things. Just want to clarify that you need to know what your hourly rate should be, so you know that you're on the right track. But
yeah. My old man just retired. Like, he had a dry cleaning business, and he sold the business, and now he's working casually for the company who bought it off him. So he'll go in, he goes and works for them, and they got a few casual people there, and he's just knocking everything out of the park, like lightning quick. And then everyone else is cracking the shits at him because he's doing everything too fast, so then they have to go home earlier. So he's just used to, he's worked for himself for however many years, so he just gets things done rather than fluffing around. So yeah, it's better off having that fixed rate.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is, in our industry, it would be the same as yours, exactly the same as yours. If you just charge, say, $100 an hour, and you go, I think it's going to take me 20 hours or whatever it is, to do the job plus parts. Well, what if it takes 24? What if you underquote? And it creates this level of suspicion, if you're sitting on your phone having this bit of a smoke go, you might be clocking out, not counting those hours, but the owners of the house is looking out and going, is Joel doing the dirty on me? Am I getting charged for this time? Whereas if you just go, the job's going to be $2,000, 20 hours for $100 an hour, and you're sitting on your phone, who cares? No one cares. It's so much better for client relationships. And we've actually changed one further step beyond that, which is only a slight little tweak, but we do complete lawn care packages and garden care packages, and we only do a few lawn renovation once-offs. That's it. And our clients get charged per month, and so they don't even get charged per service. And the difference is that they're really paying for a result, which is a beautiful, green, healthy lawn. And the amount of time or the amount of product used, whilst we do quote for certain numbers of services, is ultimately not what their goal is, right? If they paid for all the services and we did the services and they didn't get the results, they would be unhappy. If they got the results and we maybe did half of the services, which we wouldn't do because, it's dishonest. But in theory, if they were never looking there, they didn't know, but they came home, the grass was beautiful, fantastic, so, and you got to get out of that mindset of hourly rate, because it is a race to the bottom as well. And I made a little video on this as well. Like, when people ask what is your hourly rate as a gardener or as a landscaper, even if you give them an answer, they are no smarter as to what you can actually get done in an hour. They have no idea how long that job's going to take. They have no idea. It's a useless question, ultimately, from the client. Just tell us what the job's going to cost, and then go from there.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you give someone a price, like for example, in the landscaping, like if you give them a price on, it's going to be $30,000 to do the project, and then if they ask how much your hourly rate is per person, and you say we're $100 an hour per person, they think, oh, that's expensive. But the $30,000 might not sound expensive to them to get the work done. That's just because they if they don't work, if they don't know anyone self-employed, they just look at what they get an hour. It might be $30 an hour if they're doing well, and then they think, well, you're getting $99 an hour or $100 an hour. How do you? Well, that seems really expensive, but it's just you don't know what you don't know.
And this is the thing as well. So one of the things that we've done in our business, we've been so expensive for years. I mean, we've just raised our prices, but so this is not quite relevant. I'll tell you what we have been charging before we raised prices. We were charging since 2020, $127 an hour minimum for a single job, but we would not tell anybody what our hourly rate was, right? And we also, since 2021, early 2021, have called every single client who has had a service with us, regular clients, maybe 4 times a year, 3 times a year, and everybody a few days after their first service, and we've asked them for a rating out of 10. And that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ratings. And our average is like 9.2 out of 10. And we've had somebody call who that's their only job. Like, funnily enough, her name was Karen. She was the one, checking in on everyone who were Karens. But we wanted honest answers. And there was one year we had 268 ratings. I don't know what the most recent one was, but we only had 5 ratings under 7 out of 10. And all of them were from miscommunications. All of them were from, they thought they were getting more and we didn't do enough. And so that's what you got to care about. And we get away with it. Not get away with it, but we don't have problems because 90% of the people working with us are working. They're at work when their job's being done. So they're not there with a stopwatch. But even the ones who are, it's the result they care about and all that jazz. And charging that amount allows you to be more picky with who you hire, because you can pay people more. That means that you get nicer people to work with, and it snowballs. If you cut corners, you start working for the people who are cheap, who have high expectations. You can't pay people so well, so you're getting pretty average employees. All those sorts of problems. So yeah.
With something I've heard, which I love, is when people ask for a rating out of 10, they say you can't give a 7 because that's just like a default safe number to give. Whereas an 8 is a good score, but a 6 is a bad score. So that's a interesting way to do it as well.
So we treated it as a anything less than an 8 is not okay, right? 8 is fine, 9 is good, 10 is what we want. And what we found was, and this is just obvious with the maths being a 9.2 average or thereabouts, our most common rating was 10 out of 10, and it was about 40% were 10 out of 10, 30-something% were 9 out of 10, right? And then about 20-something% were 8 out of 10, and then less than 5% were 7s. And then it was, like I said, it was 5 out of 200 that was 6 or less. And so, I think that is the thing I'm most proud of and those services were all done by employees that year. I didn't do a single service that year due to health. And so that's the thing that I was most proud of as a business, is making something there where people honestly were very happy with their service. And we charged a lot, and now we charge more. And so hopefully that long may that continue.
Yeah. Where do you see the business going in like 5 years? Where do you reckon it will be compared to where it is now?
Well, I'm not sure, because we're trying some things. We've talked about this on the phone. I don't want to talk too much about, because I don't know if it's a good idea or not. You got to take some risks. We did a massive thing about a year and a half ago, in that we had probably $300,000 or so a year in commercial contracts, nice commercial contracts, and we moved them all on. We realized that wasn't our space. We weren't making great money from them because we weren't very efficient at them, and we weren't quite a perfect fit for those people. Specifically in our industry, it's a lot of that stuff is decided by a committee or a government contract, and we weren't doing the government stuff. So you can't make a committee happy because you have too many opinions. We wanted to work for dictators ultimately. So the only commercial jobs that we have 2 left. One is a private school, and it's the principal that we're trying to impress, and nobody else matters ultimately. And the other one is a small strata group where there's one person who runs it. So we moved on from that, and I didn't know if it was going to work at the time. And now we're changing. We only do complete lawn care packages or garden care packages. I think I said that before. And a few once-off lawn renovation services if we have the space. So that's definitely what we're doing going forward. But the goal one day for the business is to have Silverstone Gardening people across the country, but we want to have the best people and we want to have the best service and we want to pay the best wages. And so we're taking some risks, which I can't explain thoroughly enough until I know if they're good or not. We're taking some risks. I'm going to try something that might work in the goal of achieving that and being able to have great people come work for us long term.
Yeah. Well, from what I've seen, if it can work, it will. Because it seems like you've got your ducks in a row. And you've got some knowledge behind you. So
it seems like that, but I think the funny thing is people will look at the podcast and they will say, like, this guy really knows his stuff, so he must make good decisions. It's the opposite. I made all the bad decisions, and that's how I know my stuff, because I know that, like, I don't do that. You should do this. People go, oh, how did you come up with such a great idea? Because I did all the other stupid ones first. You know what I mean? And I that's no word of a lie. Like, my first full-time employee, I lost $27,000 off them in the first year and a half they worked with us. So I did not have my numbers right. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to manage them out. They were a great person as a human being, so they weren't something I could sack. It was all my maths, all my fault that they didn't succeed. And anyways, this might be another one of those episodes. Who knows? I'll check. We'll come back on in a year. Hey, get me back on in a year. We'll have a conversation about it.
And last question for you, Luke. Who do you think would be a good guest to have on this podcast?
There's a few. The first one that came to mind is the other podcast guy, Gary Ashton from Aussie Lawn Stars. He's so similar to you because you interview small businesses in landscaping, and his podcast is 90% of what he does is interviewing small businesses in maintenance. So that would be a good guess. And the other ones, you've had a couple on that I've had on, like Chloe Thompson, who would probably be good ones as well. So yeah, I don't know.
No, I haven't had Chloe on.
Haven't you?
No, but
I thought you had. Or maybe you said you just knew it. Then Chloe Thompson, you should get Chloe Thompson on because I think she's a great mix between the two. Someone who's experienced. And the other thing as well, as you know, is when people are presenters and they do something in front of a camera, they're way better interviews because they're not so nervous. Yeah, so she's easy to talk to, very easy to talk to.
Yep. Knows her stuff as well. So yeah, she'll be a good one.
Yep.
Luke, can't thank you enough for coming on. Love listening to your podcast. So it was good to have you on here and to get exposed to more people as well. So hopefully you get some new followers, but because I couldn't recommend it highly enough. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story.
And people, jump on Joel's Patreon now that he's going to make one, all right? And you don't even have to have ads, Joel. Just have one. We love what you're doing. So, bloody support yourself, all right?